In this video is a presentation given by Rick Sternbach. Did you know that the Equinox had a captain's yacht type vehicle at the bottom of it? Did you know that some of the designs that you ended up seeing in the show were actually previous designs meant for Star Trek the Motion Picture? Did you know that Rick Sternbach worked on Star Trek the Motion Picture all the way up until he still works on Star Trek? There were things that I thought I knew about Star Trek and Rick Sternbach that I still finding out fascinating things. I'm a big fan of his. You know, he gave me his autograph. Well, I purchased his autograph. He is inspiration for myself, and it's just a fascinating presentation. And that's the way it was with all of these presentations. You go in there thinking, well, I pretty well know a lot about this, and you go in there and you find out stuff that you never know. And that's the way it was with all these. And some people, you know, you go in with expectations, is what it is. Don't do that, because all of these presentations ended up being so good. All of them ended up being so good, and the ones that I didn't get to see, you know, it bugs me out because I'm sure they were good. But I mean, every presentation that I'm going to put up here was good. I learned a lot. So I encourage you, if you feel so inclined, to watch this presentation and all that I put up, because they're worth it. They're all worth it, or I wouldn't be putting them up. But this is the presentation by Rick Sternbach, and we'll see you next video.
Star Trek Motion Picture. So I go back a ways with this stuff here. But, you know, along with some really talented artists, Johnny, Ricardo Delgado, Jim Martin, you know, a lot of these folks who have contributed to Star Trek design over the years, you know, we had like the best time. You know, working at a studio, yeah, there's some, you know, crazy things that happen. Sometimes I had to run from, you know, one side of the lot to the other to, you know, get something approved, or, you know, pick something up from the blueprint shop, and, you know, all these sorts of things are just part of the job. Can you hear me all back there? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So for Voyager, I don't know where the time went, but Voyager was 30 years ago. You know, we transitioned in the next gen, our department, we transitioned into Voyager. So what you're going to see here is, you know, bits and pieces of 7 seasons worth of design work. Everything starts with, you know, a drawing, a sketch. You know, the wardrobe department, you know, everybody sketches out ideas, gets things approved, and then they go to get, you know, actual fabrication done. You know, with my stuff, you know, it either went to, you know, the carpentry mill, or the prop makers, or the CGI guys. But, you know, I tried to give them the best, you know, material that I could, blueprints, sketches, you know, notes about colors, and, you know, all this got run by the producers, okay? Maybe things would change a little bit here and there, but, you know, it all started, like, for me, and some of my art pals back at Burma, it all started with doing drawings. Yeah, for me, the big thing, this was a 5-month process to get Voyager through preliminary doodles, mock-ups, final blueprints, and out to the guys who actually built the ship. The writer said, well, it's a smaller ship, maybe 150 crew, smaller than the Enterprise D. And did we have anything to go by at the time? No. So, you know, I started drawing. You can see there's a look here. Let me see if I can get this one. Okay, there's a runabout. DS9 runabouts for scale, little tiny people, and this thing has big radiator fins, okay, which could, serve all sorts of different purposes. Thermal radiation, um, uh, some sort of a shield system, okay. But I put the fins on there because noted science fiction author Robert Heinlein, I knew him back in the 70s. Heinlein told me, give the editors something to delete. Okay, so, the fins went bye-bye. Function, all of it made sense, okay, even if you didn't see it all happening on the screen. I wanted to make sure that there was a consistency in like this. So, I grabbed bits and pieces and kind of put things together. Again, everything a good starship should have is on here. All right, phasers, transport emitters, all kinds of hatches, windows, nacelles, the whole thing. Yeah, this is the first prototype that the producers approved. It eventually got turned into a die-cast model, which I have, and it's very cool. We didn't get to see it on screen, but to me, this was a valid version of Voyager. Okay, now it's pointed. Okay, kind of like the Prometheus that you see. I like the idea of a ship that had sort of the shape of a throwing knife. Sleek, fast. Do you need streamlining for FTL flight? Maybe. We came up, Michael Cooter and I came up with all of the warp tech stuff back on Next Gen. Okay, and if you're talking about continuum drag, if you're talking about having to plow through space, because there might be fields and particles and whatnot, yeah, you might need some streamlining. Here's the mock-up. Adam Savage actually played with this on YouTube a couple of weeks ago. All right, this thing has survived, a lot of years. It's foam core, it's Bondo, it's paint. We had some very early graphics made up for it, and I for one love giving the producers and directors something to, something physical to walk around and look at, and then they can point at things, right? Here's an impossible cross section for that ship, breaking it down into the number of decks. If you have a line of dialogue in the show, go down to deck so-and-so. We wanted to make sure that they knew how many decks were on the Voyager. Warp core, computer stuff, storage stuff, places to store consumables, deuterium, anti-deuterium, all of that got worked into the design. Fabio Pissarro doing a beautiful CG model for Eagle Moss, for that die-cast version. Okay, again, this would have been a perfectly good Voyager. Okay, it's got a little bit of vibes from the DS9 runabout. But every part had a function, every part worked, and every part had Starfleet styling. You could not mistake this for Cardassian or Klingon. It's Starfleet. Now, the final 5-footer, well, let me go back a second. Okay. With the mock-up for this, that foam core mock-up, right? Producers got to see it, they walked around, they looked at it, they talked. Jerry Taylor, loved him as a producer, he was wonderful, and I miss her. She took me aside and she said, can you make it a little curvier, kind of like a Lexus? Jerry, anything for you. Yeah. So Voyager got a little bit of the Enterprise D, Galaxy class styling, okay? And they approved this, they gave it the final approval. I did blueprints that were 5 feet long, the same as the miniature. Okay, and we worked with Brazil Fabrication, a guy named Tony Meininger, ran Brazil, and I got to see Voyager under construction over a number of weeks and months. Here's a CG version of it. They were able to scan the miniature and take textures and shapes from the miniature. Details of the miniature. I got to photograph this, sometime after the show ended. But lifeboat hatches, windows. The windows to the top of the bridge, where you saw some transparencies up there. The phasers, sensor palettes, auxiliary deflectors. Okay? All of this stuff was documented and fed to the writers and the producers. All right. The Aero Shuttle, unfortunately, we never got to see the Aero Shuttle actually fly. Like the captain's yacht from the Galaxy class, this would have been an auxiliary spacecraft. Producer said, no, we're doing the captain's yacht thing in the movies. So, so the Aero Shuttle got stuck. Okay, maybe this was not a full Aero Shuttle. Maybe it was, what we call a mass simulator. And all you got to really see was the bottom. Forward deflector, photon torpedo launchers, lots and lots of little bitty graphics. I don't know what these were. Maybe they were like patches to subsystems of some sort. But right there, tractor beam emitter. So if you wanted to tractor another vessel, there were tractor beam emitters fore and aft, and then the visual effects guys would know where those beams would come from. Now here's the Aero Shuttle. Based a little bit on the runabout. Okay, if they had gone full tilt and built the cockpit, they could have used the cockpit from the runabout. And just modified it a little bit, a little repainting, a little carpentry work. But this thing could have flown. Tom Paris would have had a fun time with it. At one point, they told us that Voyager could land on a planet. Okay, now I had to figure out where the heck to put the legs. And a lot of people over the years have said, well, Voyager is 700,000 metric tons. Those feet would break. Okay, well, and then I wrote back. I've done this like a dozen times on Facebook. The impulse drive system is set to idle, and it will absorb. It will take care of like 90% of the ship's mass. And the feet are only to keep it from sliding around on the ground, right? And there was talk of building a footpad out on location, right? And our construction coordinator ran the numbers, and he said, no, this will cost like $250,000. Okay, so we actually did it as a CGI composite. Which was fine. Voyager had lifeboats. We didn't get to see the inside of the lifeboat, but we did get to see it fly. So, I came up with a design for the lifeboat, and this is the CG rendering that Foundation Imaging came up with. All right, shuttles and the flyer. Okay, shuttles. We, early on in Voyager, we had the use of the next-gen Type 6 shuttle, the big boxy one, with the hatch opened up in the back, and you walk into it. How could we maybe update the Type 6 into something new? Could we build the exterior? Could we build a full interior? But again, the sketches were just part of the design and approval process. Greg Jean built this, a modified Type 6, which again, it's Starfleet style. Okay, so you can't mistake it for something else. And it's got Voyager type nacelles. The style is very close. So we had fun, seeing this in flight in a couple of episodes. And then one of the producers said, we want to build another shuttle, and we want another shuttle back. And I said, where? There was no place to carve a hole in the side of the ship to put another shuttle bay door. So they said, oh, okay, all right, fine. So we built the what we call the speedboat. A lot of people refer to this as Type 9. My blueprints say Type 12. Okay, maybe there were two kinds. I don't know. Here was the interior. Okay, and this thing, had to look sleeker. They wanted a really, fast, streamlined looking shuttle. So, again, here's part of the process. Back door, we didn't build the exterior of the shuttle. We were getting away from building full-size exteriors, full-size set pieces. But we did build interior, cockpits and seating and control panels and all of that. And this is, the speedboat was one of the last miniatures that got built for motion control filming. And I managed to get a couple of shots of it. Again, Starfleet styling. With everything a good shuttle needs. RCS thrusters, it's got the nacelles, it's got the phaser strips, shield grid. They built a miniature and made it work. Quick shot of transport emitters and big sensor pallet up on the roof. Later, I got to do an Adobe Illustrator graphic for one of the die-cast models. You get a booklet with some diagrams and the history of the shuttle, that sort of thing. So it was kind of fun to do, kind of way, and kind of pretend that there were all kinds of, complicated little systems built into the walls, into the floor, into the nacelles. And you can see here you have the warp coils, and the sun directions, that sort of thing. So it's a fun little graphic. Toward the end of Voyager, Admiral Janeway, after the whole time travel thing, we had an updated version of the speedboat. So this is like the only sketch that I managed to knock out, for this. And the CG, the guys doing the CG just ran with it. Jeff Mandel, one of our graphics gurus, back at the studio. Jeff also produced the Star Trek, Galactic Maps set that's up for sale. Anyway, Jeff did the markings for the Admiral's shuttle, and very Admiral-like with the gold and the blue markings. And here's what here's the CG version of it. Again, very streamlined. and had all of the parts that the shuttle would need. Delta Flyer started out, not looking like the Delta Flyer, but all of these designs get refined over days. In the case of the Delta Flyer, okay, there were some Borg elements, supposedly contributed by 7 or 9. Lots of Borg hardware insets. Okay, these were kind of toned back a bit to maybe just a couple of little areas, but again, this is where we start. Producers talk about it. We talk about it with our art directors and so forth. Gets a little further along. Pencil drawings, hardline them in ink. Get into maybe some color sketching. The Delta Flight, okay, looking at some of the shuttles, okay, some of them are kind of tan color. Things like the Runabout were more in the Starfleet bluish gray. So we experimented. The size of the vehicle kind of determined whether or not it was going to be like a true starship or a utility vessel, a utility craft. So the Delta Flyer was going to turn into a standard sort of tan color. Getting a little closer, okay, doing sketches, dorsal view, ventral view, side elevations, and the flyer would have landing gear, okay, you have like little feet that would be tucked up underneath. And the final color sketch, gave everybody a good sense of, what this would look like on screen, where the, places for the markings to go so the CGI guys could, get all the textures and all the markings applied. Now, one of the things that I didn't have early on, I didn't have the blue work grills in the wings, okay? But those were added, right at the last minute, pretty much. CG versions of it, and then you can see here, the wings are extended, okay? In some of the CG sequences, okay, where Delta Flyer is flying past camera and about to go to warp, you'll see these wings extend, okay, and it happens pretty quick when you can see it. Now, someplace in the back section of the Delta Flyer, there were supposedly 4 escape pods. Okay, I don't know where they would actually fit because that aft compartment had, some other like walls and rooms and places to store stuff. So where do you get into the life pod? I never really found out. Yeah, we had lots of other alien ships. Prometheus, yes. Prometheus, the producers originally wanted this thing to break into 5 parts. All right, multi-vector, attack system. And we sort of asked them, what do you mean, like Transformers? Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, no, knock it down to 3 parts. So, we didn't want Prometheus to break apart and fly back together, and every part had a different color, and, that would have been nuts. Yeah, like Voltron, right, yeah. Okay, but this is like one of my final sketches of Prometheus. Again, I like the sharp, pointy, fast-looking ship, okay? The trick for me and the trick for the CGI guys was where to break the the sections, okay? Well, this front section would have its own little warp sustainer engines. The top half would have 2 nacelles, the bottom half would have 2 nacelles. So we kind of figured out how to break this into parts that can actually fly at one. I did, a bridge sketch for the set designers to go by and for producers to approve. Equinox, the Nova class, had a ball with that. Now, if you've seen the Deep Space Nine tech manual, you will see a preliminary Pathfinder vehicle for the Defiant, which looks like this. Okay, we never used this shape on Deep Space Nine. We went right to the Defiant. But when it came time to design the Equinox, I pulled out the sketch and I showed it to Peter Lawrenson, who was our VFX producer. I said, Peter, how about this? It's it's the right size, and we have the right number of crew. And he looked at the sketch and he said, "Oh yeah, let's do it." And that was the fastest approval I ever got on a design for the franchise. More sketches, lots of sketches for producers to look at, for the CGI guys to look at. Colored in version. Again, everything a good Starfleet ship needs to have. Here's a sketch of a 3/4 perspective sketch. Now this one does not have any of the markings. I left that to our graphics folks. My dad was an architect, so I learned how to do blueprint type stuff, long ago. And I like doing my own blueprints, okay, because I can, make sure everything's measured out correctly. It saves some time. Do a dorsal view, a ventral view. Now, the Equinox also had a little ship called the Wave Rider. And, even a small ship like Equinox could have an auxiliary research craft, escape craft, whatever you want to use it for. Here's the CG version with damage. So this was kind of neat. Eddie Robeson was working, I think, for Eden Effects. Eden Effects? Yeah. Eden Effects, and I got to kind of stand over his shoulder while he was, pushing and pulling some of these shapes. And, he did a fabulous job. I love it. Now, and you can get a real good sense of the scale of how small the ship is, but I mean, look at the size of those windows. Okay, on the Galaxy class, those would be about the same size windows. Okay, things like the bridge. Other parts look maybe a little bit oversized. You can also see by things like the escape hatches for the hatches for the lifeboats. Right. Another ship, time ship Aeon. Again, starting from basic descriptions in the script. This is what I came up with. Okay. Now, it's from the 29th century. So, what would Starfleet look like? Centuries from Voyager. Maybe Basari collectors, kind of a thing. RCS thrusters, some kind of a cockpit, markings, that would look sort of kind of familiar. Well, we went with a more, a slightly blockier version of this that was built in CG. Now, the timeshift relativity, this thing was built pretty much as drawn. Again, Starfleet-ish looking things from the future, okay? You know, you had things like weapons and deflectors and a bridge, some kind of engine pods and that sort of thing. You know, within the context of the episode, yeah, you got to know this was Starfleet. And there's the CG version, okay? You know, markings that were very similar, okay, windows, thrusters, you know, this says Starfleet, although it's like way ahead. Now, on Voyager, we did the episode One Small Step, wonderful, you know, homage to the Apollo program, where we had, you know, a spacecraft going to Mars, okay? I loved working on this one, okay? Because, you know, I knew NASA style, you know, spacecraft that, you know, could get you out to Mars. This was not the full ship that left Earth. There were 2 additional stages that would have been, you know, hooked on the end of this, okay? Earth departure stage, Mars orbit insertion stage, and this is the Earth return stage. Okay, the lander would have been up here. Okay, and you know, our there we go. Okay, and this is an Earth return capsule, and these interesting cargo modules here. Gosh, sort of like the Botany Bay. And a dish that would, you know, maybe evolve into the nav deflector, you know, the main nav dish. You know, solar sail, you know, solar panels here. The Russians could have built this here. We could have built this part here. Europeans could have built the departure stage. So this was an international mission within the episode. Phil Morris played, I forget the character's name. Well, he played the lone astronaut who was found in the derelict spacecraft. Now, we studied, you know, all kinds of documentation online of the International Space Station, the, you know, Apollo capsule, the lunar module, just to get, you know, a feel for the style of the inside of this Ares 4. Okay, and this was in the command module. These things here, these are on the ISS, for real. You know, some of these control panels were from a prop house, and we just made sure that everything stylistically sounded NASA-ish. You know, I came up with the placards, Velcro patches for, you know, where you stick your checklist on the wall. And, you know, we didn't explain everything within the episode, but visually it all works, it all makes sense. The ejection seat things here, these were, you know, rental units, but again, you know, they were of you know, a good enough style. Now, I had downloaded a NASA graphics standard book, and that gave us all kinds of great ideas. Now, this arrow here pointing to dead end on the outside of the space station, yeah, you can't go you can't go any further than this, and then tell you so. Yeah. Friendship 1, you know, the probe that got humanity into trouble. Okay, and older technology. Look at those nacelles. Okay, this was a really old probe from back in the what was it, USPA, pre-Starfleet. Yeah, we also did things like space stations. You know, in the art department, you know, we you know, during Voyager, we ramped up our ability to do, you know, some 3D modeling, okay, and it saved us a ton of time. I could take I could take these renders here, okay, and just, you know, email them to the effects places, okay, and they would take, you know, they would be able to take the ortho views, you know, top view, bottom view, side views, and recreate these things, you know, to look pretty, right? But, you know, giving them these starting points, you know, was just fabulous. Here's one of the CG renders. Now, to me, Jupiter Station could have been made from 6 decommissioned Starship saucers. Okay, look, there's lifeboat hatches right there. There's windows. You know, you take a Starship saucer that can no longer take the warp stress. You don't chuck it. You don't, you know, grind it up. You know, make something new out of it. There was another CG with the, you know, space background. You know, fusion generators and matter-antimatter generators in the basement. You know, these are not solar cells. These are cosmic energy collectors. But again, you can see that these were used to be starships. Lots of arrays. Okay, we have the Argus array, big, you know, like radio telescope out in space. The Remmler array, which I kind of call a car wash. The Midas array, which allowed us to, you know, talk back to the Alpha Quadrant. Again, you know, some of the 3D modeling that we could do is worked out terrific for us. So you got species 8472, you know, their secret little base where they pretended to be humans. You know, this is definitely not Starfleet. This is somebody else's, you know, hardware style. And this is what the CG guys, you know, came up with. You know, they added, you know, they added different shapes to it, but they understood from the grayscale model, you know, what direction to take this in. And you know, I think this turned out terrific. The shoot where I think, what was it, Paris and Kim got stuck in this alien, you know, jail. You know, lots of different 3D shapes could be generated, you know, on the back at the office, and the producers decided on this one up here, you know, 3 arms. The interior didn't have to match exactly, but you know, if you had the general directive, okay, it's got to be this, you know, grungy, you know, jail-looking place, then you know the exterior and the interior worked. Yeah, the alien arena. I forget which episode this was, but I went to Peter Lawrenson, yeah, our visual effects producer, and I said, Peter, for once, can we go someplace nice? You know, someplace upscale, you know, where you know, rich aliens bring their boats. So yeah, he said, yeah, sure, why not? So I based this off of like a marina where you have boat slips, right? And the final the final CG version had sidewalks and lampposts and but all in the vacuum of space. This was a fun one. This was the medical facility in up in the sky where only the well-off patients would get treated. And again, the 3D preliminaries just helped a huge amount. Again, more CG. You can build shapes. Cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste. Make interesting collections of shapes that don't look Starfleet. The Herosian, again, another alien style. If you look at the Herosian interior set, like their command center, okay, they had these spires, okay, these shapes were built into the set. And I typically like to, look at the set, look at wardrobe, look at what they're doing with makeup on these alien, races, and, work them into the hardware. Okay, so you can kind of see, like, in the back of your mind, oh yeah, these shapes work together. Again, the Herosian, these long spires, were part of the set structure. So why not turn them into nacelles? Okay, again, a very different kind of ship. Very blocky, with some streamlining. Pardon me. Now, this was my rough model for the Herosian Dreadnought. Okay, and yeah, there's all kinds of interesting little, round, cylindrical shapes. Again, those long nacelles. Well, when they put together the Hero CG model for the episode, they made these things rotate. It hadn't even occurred to me to make them moving parts, but they made these rotate, and in the episode you can hear this sort of motorized ka-choo, 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 and it just worked. It just worked. And oh, there's the Dreadnought. Okay, so in the back there were round pieces. You can actually see them rotate. Okay, the Kazon, again, another style, different alien race that we met early on. This thing smashed into Voyager. Okay, so we saw this piece on set. They built this on set, and this torpedo was small enough where this hatch opened up, and a bunch of Kazon came out, with disruptors. Again, different style. Okay, it's got fins, but there's some curves built in. Different sorts of shapes from Starfleet. There's the miniature that was used. Okay, very distressed looking. We didn't build the back. Okay, because this part was not on set. This part was. So we had to match up, the miniature had to match what we built on stage. Props. Every alien race had a different set of, weapons props, science instruments, that sort of thing. So the Kazon, all right, they kind of look like maybe they could be like Klingon-ish, very chunky, blocky, very complicated looking. As opposed to the sleeker looking, Starfleet weapons. This was the Type 4 compression rifle that we had for, early episodes of Voyager. Alien spacecraft. This to me was based on the Russian N1 booster and spacecraft. Again, why not? Something big that could have been built by that alien civilization that was living in a sped up time cloud. Another, this is definitely not Starfleet. Okay, this was my take on the hierarchy surveillance ship. I think our effects guru Dan Curry provided the final look to this, but I had fun. I love doing blue pencil sometimes. This was the hardline version of the Krenin ship. They had that time ship, and the bad guy kept cracking time whips and messing with Voyager. Voyager had a shield which prevented it from getting infected, and So the story went. Here's another, after one of the time snaps, the crater ship kind of changed design, so I had to come up with a second one. The reptiles the reptile mama that was like protecting her eggs from Paris and Kim. This is their ship. Okay, again, different sort of design. What kind of propulsion? I don't know, but something that you could do in visual effects. And there's the eggs. Okay, I had to do 3 different sketches so that they could build the egg nest on set. NASA's freighter. Okay, when Tubak and Paris were stuck on that alien planet with NAS. Now this became sort of an easier model to make, in CG, because all you had to do was like build one section here and then copy paste. So I like doing that, especially because we were on such a time crunch for some of these episodes that gave you guys a little leg up. The Voth, okay, the dinosaur, the dinosaurs that left the Earth, like the dolphins and hitchhikers, and this was their research ship. And then their city ship, I mean, look at that, that's Voyager right there. Okay, the Voth city was, going to be a much bigger thing. And these, again, were sketches, starts the ball rolling with the designs. And the final Voth ended up looking, very stylistically similar to the research vessel. Again, Voyager for scale. And we also did some interior looks to show just how big this thing was inside. Okay, let's see, latent image. Other like random alien ship in the week. In some cases, these, the CG, you do a different color scheme, you stretch something, you squash something, and you can make a new ship. I loved doing this. The tanker, the garbage scow. Again, I talked about Art Deco for like steam locomotives and diesels from the 30s, 40s. This to me said locomotive. The space elevator. Okay. This is an actual sort of research concept to try to get to orbital altitudes by using cables and cylinders and some kind of propulsion system. So we had one in the episode. Props. Every time something is mentioned in the script that we hadn't seen before, okay, get to drawing. So the gel packs. Okay, synthetic neural tissue in a squishy bag. Okay, could it think faster than an isolinear-based computer? Maybe. There's looking at one of these bags here, and in the episode, the bags got infected, so they were sort of gray and yucky looking. But this just showed, the writers came up with a lot of these concepts, and we drew them up, and the prop folks got them made. This is not future. Yeah, computer stuff, computer monitors. We were thinking about using, a Mac desktop computer, just to build on and paint up differently and have the screen actually work. Back then, we tried to get into that, but it didn't work for us. Today, you got it all. You got it all. And there's screens that you can build into any prop you like. You know, but back on Voyager, we were just kind of starting. Tricorders, we had prop makers who, tricorders and other science instruments could be built and outfitted with batteries and LEDs and look good. Other sorts of props. All right, there's the Doc's holo badge. Okay, we never saw it actually open, but the shape was something that they liked. Lots of different doodles and sketches and things got made. Set pieces to look like holodeck emitters. Um, you know, uh, the doc was handing out little isolinear things. Astrometrics lab. Okay, this was a new set that we built, and we would have some kind of a visual representation of where Voyager was flying. Again, more little 3D grayscale models that can be used, and I could put a grayscale model up against the space background and really give the producers a decent idea of what these things would look like. Desktop devices of all shapes and sizes. We had let's say portable force field. Yeah. You know, devices that would work with maybe some existing props or just brand new stuff. Board stuff. Isolinear chip holders. Isolinear rods. We built a lot of these, and these things can be used in many different sets. On the ship or on the space station. We built things into floors. We built things into shuttle walls. Again, lots of ideas, and okay. Here we got notation flip-flop LEDs, and we saw those a lot, didn't we? Things built into the sets. Just to show the special effects people and the folks building the walls, okay, where things were going. Again, more console bits and pieces, very futuristic looking, very Starfleet. Sometimes we use existing hardware. We went out to a salvage place. They found this big fiberglass sphere, and we turned it into that Omega chamber that wasn't supposed to exist. More CG modeling for the warp core. Okay. Now Voyager had 2 warp cores, but only one was connected at a time. The other was kind of like a spare D cell. More props. And again, some things got built, some things were passed by. So, it was all fine. Oh, Janeway's bathtub. It's not a spaceship, but it's hardware. Okay, so yeah, I got to do sketches of a bathtub where Janeway and Chakotay were kind of stranded for a little while. Containers I drew. I can't tell you how many containers I drew in 15 years. Even an incubator. for for a kid. You could sort of tell what it was just by looking at it. Um, okay, hibernation pods. We built it, a few of these in different styles. The science projects for the kids on Voyager. Um, this potato here was it was a resin bottle, and they made an exact copy casting, and so you had two clone potatoes. Child's Play, where this was guitars, which was Naomi Wildman's home world. The folks came from there. And there she is. She looks so cute. Um, um, Sorry, I keep forgetting her name. Oh, I keep forgetting the actress's name. Anybody remember?
Scarlet.
What?
Scarlet Palmer.
Oh, yeah, Scarlet Palmer's right, yeah. Yeah. So the visual effects added the overlaid some cloud patterns and some graphics onto the visual of the globe. Okay, so this thing is 18 inches across. So I got to paint this thing and texture it for the episode. Again, not a spaceship, but I had fun doing this Klingon serpent. Sort of Chinese looking, but again, way different sort of eyeball shape. And it said Klingon to me. Chakotay had his mandala in his office, and this also, the spiral goes along with the spirals that were seen in flashback with Chakotay's ancestors. Now, what are these spirals and what are these lines? Well, after this had been approved and fabricated, I told Jerry Taylor, this is the Milky Way. The spiral shape of the Milky Way. What are these lines? Wormholes. The wormhole from Alpha Quadrant out to where Voyager was stranded. The wormhole from DS9 out to the Delta Quadrant. Or the Gamma Quadrant, sorry. Gamma Quadrant is all mixed up here. So I told him, Jerry, this is a map of the galaxy made by, Chakotay's ancestors after they had met alien races. And Jerry said, oh, okay. She sort of had to accept it, but they liked it. They very much liked it, and the shapes that were actually, used in the episode were kind of like the galaxy and a map of the wormholes. So we helped add to the background of the story. And we are on time. Holy cow!
Yeah, if you look back,
Let's see who handles the room lights. Oh, there we go. Room lights up.
if you look back at the design of the original series Enterprise, what do you like most about it, and what would you want to change if you could go back to 1964 and say, here are my thoughts?
If I could go back and change the original 1701,
What would you like best about it, and what would you want to?
I don't think I would change anything. Now we have, of course, evolved that technology. Okay, but as an iconic ship, the one that is sitting in the Air and Space Museum in Washington, okay, that is a single, solitary, wonderful design. Okay, yeah, we can get ideas from it. I wouldn't change it, you know. Um, they're having other ships added to the lineage. But it is what it is. And Matt Jeffries and company had some really, really nice, um, designs in mind. I mean, now everybody's seen Matt's sketches of how he got to that shape. Okay, and yeah, maybe the ship was upside down at one point. I don't know. But he developed that. Okay, and him being a pilot, Roddenberry having flown, a lot of these people understood the technology of flight, okay, and adapted it for outer space. And like some of us who have worked, with the franchise, we've taken it like way the heck out, but we started with what they started with.